Let's go through my 4-mark essay on Anne in Spectacles, Sheila. The following essay was written by me, Maria, from No Awful GCSE, who did achieve 4 marks in GCSE English Literature, and thus permission has been given to use this resource as you please. So let's get started. The question itself was, how does Priestley use Sheila's change throughout the play to present his ideas? So clearly we know that there's a focus on Sheila and her development. So let's see what I did. So I began by doing a plan. It's really important that you always do a plan because not only for your own structuring and your own essay to be able to set out 3 key points, but also to show the examiner that you haven't just pre-prepped and memorized an essay, you have actually thought about it within the exam constraints. So we've got Sheila. You can see here that it's a mind map and I have 3 points. Now, whatever structure you like to form, whether it's bullet points or however you like to write out your plans, it's up to you. However, the main idea is you need 3 points. And my first point here talks about Sheila as a socialist bubble, the utopian perception, the very happy perception of life. You know the quotes I've written? She ran along, mummy, protected, my daughter should not be dragged. So we've got this idea that she's sheltered. And then we link it to the second point of her being envious, the segregated class system. If she'd been some plain girl. And then in my third point, we talk about her as a social revolutionist, how she's penitent, she's morose over her action. So hopefully you can see the vocabulary that I had used when revising and how I've embedded it into my essays. She says mother. So she goes from saying, mummy to mother. So this transition into a very much more formal manner. We can't keep building this great wall between us. So hopefully you can see that my 3 points have been very carefully constructed, that there's this sense of transition. So in this case, I've gone chronologically. I've discussed that firstly, she's in a socialist bubble. Then she's quite envious and she's been raised to be quite segregated from others. And then my third point is that she's a social revolutionist. So that was my plan. And my overall line of argument can be seen here, where it's showing her repentance through her awakening. And that's her development. So I always then move on to writing my introduction. Introductions are terribly important. You want to mention your context and you want to really show the examiner what you need, what you're made of. So I began my introduction saying, the contemporary audience would be highly familiar with the concept of socialism, knowing that it was the contemporary electorate who voted out Churchill, the war hero, ushering in the first long-term Labour government that created this massive shift from focalising on the capitalists to the disenfranchised proletariat. So let's go through that again. First thing I mentioned was contemporary audience, which means audience of that time. That shows that I'm paying attention to the contextual ideas there. They would be highly familiar with the concept of socialism, key theme, knowing that it was the contemporary electorate, which basically means the voters of that time, who voted out Churchill, the war hero. So there's some specific context there. So who voted out Churchill, the war hero, ushering in the first long-term Labour government that created this shift from focalising the capitalists to the disenfranchised proletariat. So I've introduced a lot of history there. Okay, nothing very specific to Sheila just yet, but I've spoken about it. And then I make that next link to Sheila. So it says, Priestley portrays Sheila's development and gradual growth towards socialism as the catalyst necessary to cause this chain reaction, from this flawed society of segregation. So that is the unique line of argument, and I would recommend that all of you try to have your unique line of argument there. So initially we spoke about context, and then I tried to link context to the play. And what I'm trying to do there is basically link what Priestley wrote to what his wider intentions were. He uses Sheila as a catalyst to cause this reaction in the flawed, to cause this chain reaction from the flawed society of segregation. So I'm talking about Priestley's intentions there. And feel free to use this as you please to pinch any phrases that you can. I spent a lot of time making these, and I would love for you guys to benefit from that as well. So let's look at the first paragraph now. Now, I begin the first paragraph by saying initially, and this is because I've structured my essay chronologically. So my first paragraph will be for the initial bit, my second paragraph will be for the middle, and then my final paragraph will be for her change. So that's why I've started it like that. Priestley portrays Sheila, so this is my point. Priestley portrays Sheila as infantilized and wide-eyed, conveying the sheltered upbringing that members of the bourgeoisie often adopted. Okay, so that's my point. And we've got some really nice vocabulary here. Infantilized means, it just means to be treated as younger than you are, and wide-eyed, conveying the sheltered upbringing that members of the bourgeoisie often adopted. So even in my point, you can see that I'm making contextual links there, and that's absolutely fine. Sheila is described in the stage directions to be lively. So we've got some quotations here. So described to be lively. Now, just from this one word, I've said contributing to the childlike perception of the utopian world. Then I said, Sheila is encircled in a wealthy sphere or bubble that creates a sense of ignorance to the suffering and problems within the crux of society. I believe that should say and shows or highlights. So, and shows the problems within the crux of society. So here you can see, and a really important, I think, a grade 9 technique that's not spoken about is giving your own insight. Okay, what do you think? Why do you think that this has happened? Why do you think Sheila is presented as in a very childish manner? And my insight was Sheila is encircled in a wealthy sphere that creates a sense of ignorance to the suffering and shows the problems within the crux of society. So that is my insight. Make sure you show your insight. And where do you get this insight from? Well, that's from the revision. That's from the practicing essays and realizing things that can be really nice, lovely links to make. She regards her parents as mummy and daddy. So we've got our next quote. As mummy and daddy, who play vital roles in patronizing her with the declaratives. So let's go on to the next page now. So the parents patronize her with the declaratives, run along. So why I said that is because run along is a parental remark that would be said to childish or young children. And the fact that they've said this to a woman who's going to be engaged is very patronizing. So it's one of Priestley's more discreet mechanisms where he really does highlight the irony of the situation. Now, phrases like this, then, shows the examiner that you're then taking that and going further. So those phrases are really important. This then provides reason to Sheila's petty and jealous nature for her rose-tinted glasses depicted via the warm lights. So again, we've got another quote here, and we're linking everything together. The protected and sheltered upbringing. Remember, a lot of GCSE English is about how you communicate your thoughts. And if you're using very nice adjectives, very varied rather than the same thing, it definitely does make it refreshing to read. The protected and sheltered upbringing further gets mentioned as Mr. Burling says, and this is another quote, "My daughter should not be dragged through this." So hopefully you can see that there's a culmination of quotes. We're adding and adding and adding, showing how she's portrayed as very, very childish. And with each quote, we're saying a different idea that can be represented. Okay? My daughter should not be dragged through this. Ironically, the verb dragged, so we've got a bit of zoom going on here. The verb dragged suggests suffering and injustice and places Sheila as foil to Eva. So foil is an English technique that I've spoken about in my videos, which just means a character that is contrasted to another character. For example, in Jekyll and Hyde, they are foils to one another, Jekyll and Hyde. They're opposites. So this is a method mark. It suggests suffering and injustice, which places Sheila as foil to Eva Smith, both being young and of similar ages. So we are then drawing links of comparison to them both being young and of similar ages, and therefore that's the basis of comparison. Priestley draws links between the two. The spiteful, I believe that word would be, spiteful and materialistic Sheila to the victimized and crippled by society Eva. Okay, so again, some really nice words there. The victimized and crippled society of Eva, which further widens the disparity created by the segregated class system. What do we notice about this sentence? Well, it links back. The segregated class system, this links back to the introduction. Now, I know it said it would be better to use varied vocabulary, but when you're trying to purposefully link back to the introduction, use similar wording, because that was the special line of argument. And then I've got my conclusive sentence. Priestley does this to show his or reveal his criticisms towards the ignorance that the bourgeoisie structure holds, as well as the sanctimonious traits that they instill onto their children. Now, that's an important word there, sanctimonious. So it's a bit difficult to read this, many apologies. So sanctimonious, which means very self-righteous, believing that you're right, and the traits that are instilled onto their children. So this is a very unique point there, because it's suggesting that the reason why Sheila is like this is because of the way she's been treated by her parents. So we're linking the initial point of this first paragraph, which is that Sheila is presented very childishly, to the final conclusive sentence that she's been treated childishly, and it shows the impact of the parents and how they are passing their ignorant traits on and forward. So that's that first paragraph. Let's now look at the second paragraph. As Priestley sheds light on Sheila's involvement, the traits begin to be shamefully felt and judged as he pressurizes Sheila's envious and spiteful nature. So notice that this point isn't very Sheila is very envious and Priestley presents her as very jealous. No, you can see here that it's flowing, there's a lot of fluidity to it. So as Priestley sheds light on Sheila's involvement, the traits begin to evolve. Okay, so make sure your points are flowing, as in, from this point, we can link it to the next point. And she starts to feel some shame and remorse and then we link it to the next point about her envy and her spiteful nature. This is evidenced, that's a nice way of saying this is shown, when Sheila begrudgingly admits It's really important, guys, to also put adverbs before when you're talking about how the characters say things, because that also emphasizes your point there. So she begrudgingly admits, I suppose I wouldn't have said it if she'd been some plain little creature. Okay? Now, Priestley's use of the triplet of the ugly, plain, miserable, and little exacerbates, which means like shows even more, exacerbates. Sorry, the word is just missing off the page. Exacerbates, you can think of a bad word, due to the sanctimonious sense of entitlement and the belief that they are superior to all else, and they cannot endure any positive aspects of the deprived, disenfranchised members of the working class. So that's quite a lengthy sentence there. That could be shortened and improved, but it's just highlighting how the triplet highlights the disdain that the capitalists had towards the disenfranchised and how there's a lot of hypocrisy in their belief systems. Okay? Sheila exhibits one of the 7 deadly sins. So, a lot of people revise this point in the exams and continue to, and they then make that a whole paragraph to talk about. Whereas hopefully you can see here that I'm picking out lots of different context points and then adding them cumulatively, building up on them as smaller points. The examiner really does appreciate that, because you're, instead of using that as your sole point, the more evidence that you show, then the more convincing your argument is. So, Sheila exhibits one of the 7 deadliest sins, envy, and Priestley manipulatively molds, okay, manipulatively molds this to underline the segregation that dehumanizes the proletariat, whilst allowing the greedy and unfeeling capitalists to feel celebrated. Now, the reason why I use the word manipulatively is because I'm reinforcing that it is in fact Priestley that's doing all of these things. That he is in charge. He is writing this and he is crafting the characters all himself, and therefore he is the one that's doing this to underline the segregation that dehumanizes the proletariats and celebrates the greedy and unfeeling capitalists. Through Sheila's initial feelings of remorse and responsibility, just another quick comment that I want to make, that whenever you use comments like through this, Priestley is able to, that is really good as well. That is really good to do, because you're showing that through this technique, that is what has been allowed to happen. So through this is the first of many switches that sets Sheila on the path to revolutionize her and others' morals. So hopefully you can see how we're slowly progressing on to the next point, which is Sheila as the social revolutionist. Okay, so a really important technique is the fluidity of the essay. Moving on to the final point. Over the course of the play, Sheila then evolves, and over the course is a really nice phrase, into a penitent character who admits the inspector's words and grows into a more mature character. So really nice phrases and sentences to talk about. Penitent, she grows into a more mature character. Now, her maturity is cited in the rapid change from the childish mummy. So now we're talking about the development in her language. From the childish mummy to the more appropriate mother. And I should have said age appropriate as well. Furthermore, that's a really nice phrase to use. It's showing that you're, as I said, going deeper into the analysis. This more colder and disassociative name distances Sheila from the prior warmth of her parents' blinding ignorance to a more independent woman. Okay, so don't feel afraid to make these really big connections. Just from one word, I'm able to say that it's more disassociative, and she's distancing herself from her parents' blindness to a more independent and reformed woman. Sheila's previous materialistic readiness is dissolved through the change from, oh, it's beautiful, to refusing that very engagement ring, despite the obvious economic benefits and certain stability to marrying Gerald. So you can see this paragraph is not just about talking about the quotes alone, but talking about how there's been development in them. The audience can infer, this is a really good phrase, infer, right? Because there's two different ways we can say this. We can say infer, or or we can actually just understand. So infer means that the audience can go into something, go into a concept and assume. Whereas if something is implied, that's the total opposite. So implied means that it's given to the audience. Here's a topic for you to understand. Whereas infer is the audience making their own understanding. So the audience can infer how Sheila has undergone an awakening, suggesting that the remote capitalist was dormant and futile. The pain and shame of reflection for Sheila acted as the religious illusion of purgatory, a state of self reflection, and highlights Sheila's readiness to be self deprecating. Okay? So that's another idea to talk about the religious ideas behind that. In severe contrast to her responsibility, refusing her parents. Therefore, Priestley and the audience seem to gift her repentance for the sincerity of her mentality and allow Sheila to embody the ideal social revolutionist that voices her concerns. Sheila's maturity into a more outspoken woman who aims to spread her awareness through the assertion, we need to stop building a wall between us and that girl. Okay, so you can see how the quotes from the plan have really evolved now. The intent of the declarative. Remember, there's a lot of awareness in my essay here about the types of sentence structures as well. We've got an assertion, a declarative. So those are also the things that you need to be thinking about in terms of structure. It highlights Priestley's message of the futility in creating more divisive systems, entrapping the majority to benefit the minority. Now, I was really proud of that sentence. I remember when writing that. That is a unique point there. And I give you full permission to steal that, okay? The futility in creating more divisive systems that entrap the majority to benefit the minority. And that is the embodiment of Priestley's socialist agenda. So Priestley does have an agenda in his writing, and that is the agenda. Although arguably the statement is undermined, so arguably this is a really nice thing to talk about as well. You can go against your point a little bit by saying arguably, but then you can strengthen it by saying, however, this still shows, okay? So arguably the statement is undermined by the determiner that, which juxtaposedly separates the two entities. However, nonetheless, we comprehend as the audience the gradual steps that Sheila takes. Because that girl sounds a bit rude, doesn't it? But we understand that it's a very gradual transition that she is making. So we are now progressing on to the conclusion. Sheila evolves into a character who challenges the disempowering system that she herself was admittedly a beneficent of and taken advantage of, beneficiary of. So we're talking about how she's evolved as a character, that's important, from the disempowering system that she herself had involvement in because she was a beneficiary of and taken advantage of at the same time. Priestley has meticulously enabled Sheila to represent the earth-shaking shift that needed to be done through allowing her repentance, not by the minority of the crime, but through her painful self-reflection that festered her mind restlessly. So, i.e., I'm saying that Priestley did not make Sheila get off easy by saying that the crime she did was minor, but more that she was very self-reflective and felt responsible. Sheila becomes alarmed with the consequences of her actions. And through this, Priestley urges the contemporary and perhaps even the modern audience to do the same. As revealed in the 20th century adaptation concluded the inspector's speech through shining the spotlight at the audience, unleashing Priestley's encouragement of self-reflection. So this was an adaptation that I had actually seen, and it actually showed that at the end, instead of all of the lights being on the characters when the inspector is doing his final speech, the actual lighting was done on the audience. And you've got to always remember that this was a play. So this device that was used, the theatrical device, actually exemplified Priestley's overall message that we should look for self-reflection within us. If you found this video helpful, make sure you give it a like, and a lot more of these are coming. I'm going to share all of them with you because I genuinely want you guys to benefit and improve from these. So if you found it helpful, make sure you subscribe, share this resource, and can you help me get to my goal of 100,000 subscribers? That would be great if you can. Have a lovely day. Comment any questions you may have, and see you soon.
If you want all grade 9s like me, subscribe now to Know for GCSE.